Hi everybody, and welcome to this short video for SEDE 4312 about defining reading. So I want us to think about a little bit in this segment about how each of us as English teachers, English educators, or future English teachers define reading. So think about yourself as a reader. I know that you've answered this question on the reading survey that you filled out for me, but I want us to explore it a little more deeply. So when I think about myself as a reader, as you can tell from my office behind me, I do like pen and ink books. I like print books, and I read plenty of them. I read a variety of them at many different levels. So I read children's books, middle grade books, young adult books, as well as adult books, and I read them from not only the fiction section, but also nonfiction. At the same time, though, I always have with me in my purse or in my backpack my e-reader. I have a Kindle that I like to read on. I read books, print books and ebooks at different times. So for example, I learned from Donalyn Miller, who's the author of the book Whisperer, that one way to increase the amount of reading we do, because we all lead such busy, hectic lives, is to read in what she calls edge time. So, for example, the time when you're waiting at the doctor's office, or when you're waiting in line at the grocery store, or when you're waiting in the car to pick up your child from school. That's edge time. So for my edge time reading, I like to read on my Kindle. I also like to read on my Kindle early in the morning when I wake up. I stay in bed, I put on my reading glasses, and I don't have to turn on the light. Sometimes I read on my Kindle before going to sleep so that the light doesn't keep others awake. So I read on my Kindle at different times. If I take a trip on an airplane, I also read on my Kindle then, because it's much easier to carry a stack of books stored on my Kindle than it is a stack of books stored in my carry-on luggage. There's usually a few books packed in my checked luggage, I'll be honest, but for the carry-on, it's usually my e-reader, my Kindle. So I want us to think about the different kinds of reading we do. I also read on my phone. Probably many of you all read on your phone. I don't always read books on my phone, on my Kindle app or on my Nook app, but I do certainly use my Audible app. I love to listen to books. Listening to books is the same as reading books. Currently, I'm listening to an adult mystery. I'm listening to X by Sue Grafton. She writes a mystery series for adults. So I read on my phone sometimes. Other things that I read on my phone, I read blogs, I read Facebook posts, I read tweets from different people who I follow on Twitter. So reading looks different these days than it used to look. And I want you to keep that in mind as you're getting ready to go work with your own students. Sometimes we need to broaden our ideas about what reading is and how we define it. As you read in Notice and Note in that first section about is reading still reading, some teachers struggle to accept the various kinds of reading that their students do, and we need to avoid that. In that chapter from Notice and Note, Beers and Probst referenced Nicholas Carr's book, The Shallows. So in The Shallows, Carr talks about the internet and how it's changing our brains. And if we think about the reading that our kids do and that we do sometimes, we can see how that happens. So when I read, for example, before I got my Kindle, I downloaded the Kindle app and had that on my iPad, and I would read ebooks on my iPad. But I soon found that I was having a hard time getting lost in the books that I was reading on my iPad, and it's because different notifications would sound in the background. So I would hear one sound for when an email came in. I would hear another sound for when somebody responded to something I had posted on Facebook, or when somebody replied to a tweet I had sent out. And anytime I heard those sounds, you can guess what happened. I would leave the ebook, go and click on the icon for that different app, like Facebook or Twitter or my email, and I would get sucked into that reading and away from my book. That's what led me eventually to go out and get a Kindle, because I wanted to have an e-reader, but I wanted it to be free from the other distractions, because I felt myself changing as a reader. I was reading at a much more shallow level. I was still reading widely, but I was having a hard time getting lost in a book. So consider that also when you're working with your students. And if you get a chance, check out Nicholas Carr's book, The Shallows. It's some really fascinating reading. I also want to mention something else that they talked about. They talked about Goodreads and what it can do for us as readers, and how our kids can use that. So reading, some people feel like it's a solitary act, but I want you to think about what you do when you finish reading a good book. Do you go to Barnes & Noble and look for a quiz on that book, or do you want to share it with somebody? Most of us want to talk about the book when we finish reading it, so a lot of times it's after we finish reading the book that it becomes a social act for us. And Goodreads is a website with the potential to allow that social aspect of reading. So if you get a chance, I want you to go to goodreads.com if you haven't already and sign up for an account. It's a free account. And then what you can do is look for different people to connect with on Goodreads. I'm listed there. I believe my username is just Margaret Hale. But the way Goodreads works is you can catalog the books that you read, or you can follow your friends and see what kinds of things they're reading. You can also see what current books are trending in different genres. A lot of times authors are on there or publishers are on there and they're giving away books. So again, it's another chance to build your classroom library. But spend some time exploring Goodreads and see how you can connect with other readers using that social media site. In the book Notice and Note, on page 13, they list several other social media sites for readers that you might spend some time exploring for your students. The last thing I want to talk about briefly is the survey questions. So you all completed a reading survey in class, but I want you to revisit page 14, and Beers and Probst include in there some survey questions that they adapted from Frankie Siberson. Frankie Siberson's Twitter handle is in there as well. She's somebody you might want to follow on Twitter. But I like the way they've modified these questions as a way to include some more contemporary types of reading that our students might be engaged in. So think about that as you work to adapt the reading survey that you completed for me for use for your own students. That's it for now. Thanks for tuning in.